Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Fit Conversation. It's been a while since we've been before you, but we are re-upping our podcast. And today we have two exciting guests that we want to update you on some progress at Come As You Are Community Church. We have the new pastor of Come As You Are Community Church, Pastor Albert Brownlee, who represents the present, I represents the past, and Jack Fitzpatrick III that represents the future. And gentlemen, thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Glad to be here.
So, Albert is the resident historian.
Yeah.
And I think I want to start this way because a lot of people think that this just happened. They don't know the behind the scene conversations and the move of God and all of those confirmational things that God did in order to happen. I served here, ladies and gentlemen, for 29 years. And from day one, it has been my goal to work myself out of a job. I never forget, before I took the church, I was speaking in Ridgecrest, North Carolina, and there John Maxwell and I had spoken at another Promise Keepers meeting, and I told him, I said, since I met you last, hey, I've accepted the pastorate of the church. And he wrote down in a book that gave me, Anthony, build leaders and work yourself out of a job. So from day one, that has been my modus operandi, to make sure that I built leaders and worked myself out of a job. And for 29 years, I have been doing that. And the time came for that to be implemented in a major way. So that's where we're going to pick up the story. Albert, you stepped into that space during a time when our formal minister of music was called home. And you were coming here just to help us out in that regard, even though you had preached here before. And God began to work behind the scene and do some things. So why don't you pick it up there and just share your side of that?
Sure, thank you. So from my perspective, I came here to help out. I came here out, as a matter of fact, I told you I could help for 90 days.
That's right.
I said I'll go from October. He died the first week of October. I was here that first Sunday in October, and I went back and talked to my pastor and said, I need to take a leave if everything was agreeable. And he told me to do as I saw fit, how I felt led. And I felt led that I needed to do it. Now, what was interesting for me is at that time, I thought I was coming simply to be a blessing to the church, to the ministry, as you all grieve the loss. We were all grieving, but it was a special loss for you all because he was a part of your assembly, and I knew that. And so I wanted to be a part of the healing. I didn't recognize the need or the pouring that you were going to do to me, into me in those 90 days. And by the time the last Sunday came in December, that was the last Sunday of the year, there was a piece of me that did not want to leave, but I was very committed to my plan, what was in my heart to do, which was to return back to the ministry where I had already been working, operating, and where my family was in a different city. So it just all made natural sense. And on that last Sunday, you said to me the words that you knew that I was supposed to be here. And it was a very difficult conversation because you said, I'm gonna step out on faith and just tell you what I know God is saying to me. And I respected you enough, and I said, I hear you. I said, but I gotta go. I gotta go. I gotta go. Yeah, I was like, I gotta go, but I love you and I respect you. And it was really hard, and I felt torn. And then I said, well, this is what I'll do. I said, I will continue to help out. I said, I'll try to see if I can come down maybe 2 Sundays a month, but really try to prepare the team to move forward without me. And that was what it was supposed to be by the time we entered 22, January of 22. Come May of 22, you installed Pastor Jack as the assistant pastor of the church. And at this point, we're pretty much just flowing. Mm-hmm. You're like, what is God saying to you? I'm like, God ain't saying nothing different, but until he tell me otherwise, I'll keep doing what I'm doing. So I would come in a couple Sundays a month where I come in and literally do worship and then get on the highway and drive to my church down in Indy. And that was for the next 18 months how things remained. 23 comes around. And going out of 23, this was my story here, a former member of the church that I was attending, they were getting ready to leave the church, and they were part of the ministerial team, and I was in charge of the ministers at the time, and or at least in a leadership position with them and working with my pastor. And so they were coming to me to let me know that they were leaving the church, and they felt like they needed to have that conversation with me. They had already spoken with the pastor. And I gave them the words that I thought I needed to give them. And one of their parting statements to me was, they said, and you won't be here by the end of next year. Now, for me, I first thought, I said, oh, they off. This is off. This is not God.
This is not of the Lord.
This is not of the Lord. Who are you? What are you? I don't know who you heard or who you consulted, but God ain't tell me that. And this is the end of 22 when they're telling me this. So 23 comes about, and then around the middle front part of 23, I get another prophetic message. Now, for most, by now, people would have been picking up on the commonality, but I was so committed to what was in my heart, and what I felt was where I was supposed to be. It just made sense to me. And I think, if more than anything, it made sense because I was a little frustrated by this point about a couple things, but not frustrated enough where I felt like I needed to move. And so I got another prophecy. And this time it was from somebody across the country who did not know me. They were just connected to someone who knew me. They described me to the person. They said, do you know who I'm talking about? And they said, oh, that's easy. You're talking about Albert Brownlee. They said, give me their number. They said, well, what did God tell you? They would not tell the person. They said, just check with them and see if I can talk to them. So I trust in prophetic messages.
Now, this person lived in New Orleans, right?
Correct.
Louisiana.
They had met them in New Orleans.
Okay.
But I found out later they lived in Ohio.
Okay.
But at the time, I thought they were in New Orleans, and but they were at a conference in New Orleans together.
Okay.
And so I told them, yeah, give them my number. They called me, and when they called me, they said, thus saith the Lord. And they're telling me what God has spoken to them concerning me.
And not even knowing you.
And not even knowing me. Never met me in my life. Didn't know what I looked like. They said God described, the Lord showed them who I was, and then they described to the person they were connected to, because God told them this person is going to know who it is. And so they tell me this is what God said, and you're getting ready to leave that church that you're at. And I was like, this is off. This is not the Lord's doing. And so, I continue moving forward. And then October comes, first week of October, and they reached out again. This time they had my direct number though, and they called me and they said, I need to speak with you. And they said, we have to speak this week. The Lord has spoken to me again. And ironically enough, the same day that they called, God had spoken to me. In the ministry that I was at, I had not separated from the ministry, but the Lord had given me, I heard from God say, go clean your office out. I didn't know what that meant.
Wow.
But I went and cleaned my office out.
Wow.
That Monday. I went to pick my son up from football practice. And he said, Dad, where we going? Because he noticed we weren't driving towards the house. And I had his older brother with him. And I said, well, we're going to the church. He said, what are we going to church for on a Monday night? I said, I need to go do something. Now, my son, he's pretty in tune with the Spirit. And he immediately gets angry. He said, what's going on? What are they doing to you?
Wow.
And I said, nothing's going on. I just need to. He said, why are we going to the church? I don't like this. And so when we get to the church, I take them up to my office. I say, hey, we're going to move this stuff that belonged to me, all my personal things. I got out the office. And so, we did that. And the whole way he said, what's going on? I don't understand. Why are you doing this? And I said, son, I'm doing it because God told me to do it, but nothing's going on. And I wasn't lying. Nothing was going on at that moment. The next day I came to Fort Wayne, and because when I got home that night, I just didn't unload my truck, but that was just happenstance. There was no rhyme or reason to it. I came to Fort Wayne the next day, and your wife said, I need to see you. And I said, okay. So I came up to the church. She said, here, I want to come show you something. And when I came in, she said, this is your space. And she had set up a whole office and desk for me and different stuff. And she explained that. And I said, well, all this stuff is still in my truck.
Wow.
So that day, literally the stuff that was in my office at the other church from the night before.
Was still in the truck.
Yeah. And so she gave me keys, and I said, okay. And so then I moved everything in. And as a matter of fact, Kendra even assisted me because she said, where are you going with all that stuff? Let me go get you a car. And so all of that literally left that office on Monday night, and on Tuesday morning, it was in here at this church, and it's been there ever since. Now, I still don't know what God is getting ready to transition me. And I finally speak to the person that Tuesday night because they wanted to connect with me on Monday, but it didn't work. And when I'm speaking to them, they said, God said, you're getting ready to move. And I'm like, no, he's not. And they said, I don't care what you say. I'm telling you what the Lord said, and he wants you to just lean into, she said, you need to accept his will. And by the time, and she literally spoke to me for probably a couple hours, but by the time we got off the phone, this was the conclusion I came to. I decided, okay, this must be God. I added the things up. I said, this is God. I said, I'll leave. But I'm not doing it till June of next year, which would have been June of this year. I said, I'm not doing it till June of 24 because my eldest son at home at the time, he was a senior in high school. These were kids he had been in church with. I wanted him to get the experience of graduating with them, walking across the stage, all the things. And I was thinking about him. And I said, so we'll stay and I'll see what God is saying after June of next year. I'm not going to move right now. The next day, which is now Wednesday, October the 4th, I literally opened up my email to a message that pretty much solidified the movement that whether I wanted to or not, my season had ended at that church. And I was tore up. I couldn't understand what God was doing. And that was that. I didn't say anything. I didn't talk to anyone. I talked to one friend and said, this is what's going on. And I left it at that. And then I called my wife. Well, I actually waited till she got home. I just let her know we need to talk when she gets home. And when we got home, I said, listen, this is what's going on. We don't go here anymore. She said, well, what happened? I said, I can't really talk about it. I said, because God gave me some instructions, said, don't talk about what's going on. He said, but you don't go here. And she said, well, where are we going? Well, I was already scheduled to preach here the next 2 Sundays because you were going on a trip and you had done this some time, months before this moment. And so we came to church that Sunday. Now, what happened, let me pause and I'll try to wrap this up in the next couple minutes. Before we get to Sunday, when the lady got off the phone with me on Tuesday night, she says to me, she started to hang up, like we had said goodbye. And then I heard her be like, hey. So, right before I hung up the phone, I picked it back up. I said, hey. And she said, are you still there? I said, I am. She said, I need to ask you one more thing. She said, what are you going to say to the man that's been waiting on you? What are you talking about? What man has been waiting on me? She said, what are you going to say to the man of God that's been waiting on you? I said, I don't know who you're talking about. She said, yes, you do. She was not backing down. And I was like, I don't know who you're talking about. If it's some man of God that's been waiting on me, the Lord ain't showed me who it was. And she said, you know who I'm talking about. She said, and what are you going to say to him? Now, the only man of God that at this point is coming to mind that she could potentially be referencing is you. And I said, And that's what I said to her. I said, there's only one man in this earth that I think you could even potentially be talking about. And at this point, I don't feel that he's waiting on me for anything. And she said, that's the one. She said, and I said, well, I don't know what I'm going to say to him because I'm really kind of perturbed, right? And she tells me, she said, when you talk to him, tell him that your season has ended and that you're available. She said, tell him those two things. I say, okay. The next day is when everything happens on that Wednesday, October the 4th. I'm tore up. I tell my wife. I don't say anything to you about it.
Yeah.
And I'm processing. And she said, well, when we gonna tell the kids? I said, well, we might as well just tell them now. She said, well, you know they're gonna ask questions. I said, well, I'm the adult. It won't matter. And so I called them down. I said, hey, listen, we don't go to this church anymore. And of course, the one son who had all the questions 3 days before, he's like, I knew something was going on. And I'm like, it was nothing going on. He's like, well, what happened? Why don't we go there? I said, I can't tell you right now. I said, but we don't go there. And that was that. And I go to bed perplexed. And I wake up on Thursday morning and I'm very perplexed. And the only thing besides being perplexed was I remember what the prophet had told me 2 days before. I knew you were leaving the country that day. And so I called and I said, are you busy? He said, we're on the road. I said, I need to talk to you. He said, it's an emergency? I said, no, just something I want to tell you. He said, well, can I call you when I get checked in and when we're sitting at the gate? I said, absolutely. You called, you FaceTime me, and I said, I just want to tell you two things. That season has ended, and I'm available. You literally said no words. You just said, wow. And what impacted me the most was before I could even get to the second sentence, when I said the season has ended, Mom Peyton started crying.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, full blown, not no trickling tear, like full all out tears. So I knew that this was impactful. And you said, I can't talk right now. You said, I got to process what you just said. And I said, well, that's good, because I couldn't talk either, because I didn't even process what I was saying to you other than saying what I've been told to say. And I woke up on Friday and I was perplexed. And it was like carrying a burden, because I did not want to leave the church. And I told God on Friday, I said, I can't live like this, because my day was consumed. The rest of Wednesday, all of Thursday, Friday morning, consumed with the fact of this decision, this whole thing that was transitioning in my life that I didn't understand. And I told God, I said, I can't carry this burden. And me just being a naturally analytical person, I know how long it takes to process stuff out. Yeah. So in my mind, I'm like, it's October. It ain't gonna be till about January when it's finally gonna go away. And I don't wanna live like this the next 3 months. And I told God that. And it was one of the first times that I had ever seen where I told God something and I saw him respond so quickly. Because that's all I said to God on Friday. And when I woke up on Saturday morning, there was nothing. It was almost as if I had never, the past 4.5 years of my life being at this ministry didn't exist. I didn't feel connection. I just felt done. I felt like it's over.
So you felt like that tenure, that assignment was over. It
was over. And there was no lingering grief. There was no lingering
remorse.
Remorse. None of the emotions I had felt for 2.5 days, it was all completely silenced. And I said, I remember rejoicing, being like, God, you are so good. Because when I woke up the other 2 days prior, first thing on my mind was the pastor's name, the people at the church, people involved in all the little situations. And it was just like all day long, that's all it was. And I remember thanking God that I was free from that. And I came here that Sunday to preach. And the standard here is When you preach.
All right, Doc.
No, listen,
All right,
but this
Doc.
don't come to you.
All right, Doc.
This,
All right,
Sounds
Doc.
like a good segue.
All right, Doc. All right.
tell me what happens. I
All
get done
right.
preaching.
All
Yeah,
right,
yeah.
Doc. He gets done preaching, and he wants me to come up and do the altar call, discipleship. But, we got a protocol
Yeah.
that whoever preaches,
Give them back the invitation.
they got to give the invitation. I'm like, no, this your spot. It's your spot. And he just preached down heaven, and he has some fire. And, something that I've learned is like, you don't step in another man's fire. So I'm like, no, you're going to do the altar call. And so he was like, we were having a spat back and forth. He was in the pulpit. I was sitting on the front row, right in front of him, and he was like, Pastor Jack? I was like, no, you go ahead. He's like, Pastor Jack? I said, no, you go ahead. He's like, well, since Pastor Jack not coming, it's like, I'll open the doors. He's like, and since nobody else is coming up, me and my family are going to join. And so then I had to come and get the mic.
Yeah.
So.
I'm so familiar with that story, and yet every time I hear it, it's emotionally impacting. Because I know what was going on with me during that time, and I know what was going on with me as it relates to Jack and getting him ready and et cetera. And I knew that we needed that help to make sure that he was ready. And I said something to him the other day. We was talking. I listened to his message, and I said to him, I enjoyed your message. I said, but you don't need to tell nobody else that you weren't ready. Let's close the door on that conversation, that narrative. That's what I said.
Yes.
Yeah. Because the goal has always been, as God laid it out to me, that this would be a template for churches, particularly African American churches, that we would be 3 generations deep. Ironically, there's 15 years between you and I. Mm-hmm. And I think there's 15 years between you and Jack. Mm-hmm. You can't make this stuff up. And God has just orchestrated this for such a time as this. But Jack, I want you to share your thoughts about this whole process.
Well, for me, I had a very different viewpoint from it. I knew that Albert was supposed to only be here for 90 days. I was in the initial meeting with the praise team when we presented them with him becoming the temporary minister of music. The meeting went very well. So I was here for that. I was excited. I haven't really got to know Albert or heard him minister but 1 or 2 occasions earlier on in the pandemic. So I was familiar with his singing. I wasn't familiar with his leadership style. But I was excited because I had heard him minister before in song. So after the 90 days was up, he preached that last Sunday when he was supposed to be done. And at the end of his message, he said, he was like, I appreciate Pastor giving me a chance to preach my way out. He's like, but I'm not going to just leave you high and dry. I'm going to make sure that the praise team is ready when I do leave. So I'm going to still be around here and there just to make sure that you guys don't get left hanging. Ironically, about May of that same year that, all the things started transpiring with him, unbeknownst to us, my mom asked me about Albert. She's like, what do you feel about him? I was like, I like him, he's good, the political answer. And she was like, no, but what do you think about Albert? I was like, well, you want the real answer? She said, yeah, that's why I asked. And I was like, I believe that he's supposed to be here to help me when I become pastor. I had a different viewpoint of it, but I knew in some way, I didn't envision it like this, but I knew in some way he was supposed to be here to help me become pastor. Ironically, me and you had a conversation around the same time, and you asked me a similar question as my mom about Albert, and he was like, I don't know what's going on. Like, I was like, he's supposed to be here? He's like, yeah, that's what I think too. And he was like, I need you to pray with me. And so every day, up until he actually got here, unbeknownst to pastor or you, from that moment that he asked me to pray with him, I prayed every day. about you being here, because me and him both knew in some way that you were supposed to be here. At that time, I don't think either one of us envisioned this, but I knew you were supposed to be here. He knew you were supposed to be here, so he asked me to start praying. So I prayed every day for a year and a half, give or take how long the time frame was. And you was fighting. You was fighting. You was fighting not to be here. And me and you had a conversation or two, not many about it, but you was like, I don't know why I can't leave. Yeah. And I wanted to tell you then, but I'm like, I can't get in the way. But I wanted to tell you, that's because you got two preachers praying for you not to leave.
Now you know the rest of the story.
No, that part. It was an inside job all along.
Yeah. So, for me, there was a lot of things that, our overseer was doing to prepare me, but there was a hump that for whatever reason I could not get over. So when the time came for you to be here, before the transition ever got to our ears, God had already laid on my heart for you to help me in the area that I knew I needed help in. Me and Pastor had both. He actually asked me, and I was like, well, I kind of struggle with this. And I didn't know the name, but he knew this. And he's like, yeah, that's exactly what you struggle with. He's like, it's called administration. I said, yeah, I didn't know the name, but I knew that was the area.
You knew it was something. You knew it was something.
I can explain it. I just didn't know that was what it was called. And so I knew your background, and I knew you were expertise in that. So I, come to you and ask for you to start teaching me about administration and how to do it. And for whatever reason, we had already clicked.
Yeah.
But I think something about that, communication and transaction made us closer and brought our bond closer. Yeah. And unbeknownst to both of us, a month later, this will be presented based upon what God had told him and you, unbeknownst to me. Mm-hmm. And then that got presented. So I got a very different view from it, but my viewpoint was I knew early on, long before any of this happened, that you were supposed to be here.
One of the things that's the internal workings of this for us as a church. But I've always believed that it was bigger than us. Pastor Kim and I was in a meeting last night, and he with some other pastors, and he made a statement, that when all this happened, that everybody thought that he would be coming back to Come As You Are. He said, no, that's not the agenda. From day one, Pastor is always, and he taught the new membership class, so he had this down pat. And you remember the new membership class is the pastoral vision, 12 pastoral vision. And one of those, they all start with T, teaching church, transforming church, etc. But one of those was transplanting church. We always believed that our goal was to build leaders and transplant those leaders in different areas of the world in ministry, etc. And God provided us creative ways to do that. So he always knew that once that door opened, because he and I had already talked about it, for him to pastor the church he pastored now, that's where he was supposed to be, and that was a part of the transplanting church, transplanting leadership. So for me, I always knew that this was bigger than a kayak experience, and it is. And I felt like somebody had to do it in order for us to do it as an African American church experience, particularly in Fort Wayne. But I thought it was bigger than that. I watched over the years. I've collected information from those that I admire that have done it. I collected information from Pastor Daniel in Brazil, because when I first started going to Brazil, he became an instant brother, and he was into pastoring. And I watched him lose his wife while he was pastoring. I interviewed him after he lost his wife, and he's probably been 6 months, and after then, and he sit there at the table talking to me, and he says, Anthony, there was times that I went to the church that I didn't have to go because I had leaders to be there and do it. I went, and I could have been spending that time with my wife. I wept. It's still emotional even thinking about it. I was there when God spoke to me to say to his son, you need to close that business. That's not what God wants. And you need to go back to seminary and study the word. He immediately talked to his wife, closed a successful clothing business downtown Rio Bonito, and enrolled in the Baptist seminary in Rio de Janeiro and got his degree and became a pastor in Rio de Janeiro. And then his dad transitioned out of the pastorate, and the First Baptist Church continued to grow. And I felt like that impact there had to be the impact that we would have here in Jerusalem. Samaria caught it first, you know, and I'm seeing pastors considering it now. They all got their own time frame, but it's on the radar like it never was before. And I think that the way we see church transitioning, that we have to begin to have leaders in place. We have to disciple. You know, Jesus gave 3 years of his public ministry life to 12 individuals. 11 of them got it. And according to scripture, they turned the world upside down. I feel that we as a body shouldn't be doing any less than that because of the Parakletos, the power of the Holy Spirit that he gave us in order to do the greater works. So based upon that scenario, I want to be an open and honest conversation about it. So that's why I wanted you to share your perspective and Jack share his perspective. But let's talk about that, lean into that even more. What do you think from your perspective, Jack, has been the most difficult thing about this process?
The adjustment in leadership.
Okay.
Where there's a change in leadership, there's a change in protocol. There's a change in style. There's a change in tradition. There's a change in action sometimes. And so not holding him accountable to his predecessors' actions and how they do things and how they set things up to be done has been a difficult thing to navigate.
Because you were here with me.
I've been here with you for 15 years,
Yeah.
14 years.
Yeah.
And so that's all I've known. And so having to adjust to that style of leadership, which is drastically different than yours, has been something that, you know, you have to adjust to. But it has been a positive if you adjust to it. But if you don't adjust to it, it can come with tension.
But see, that in and of itself speaks volumes about a maturity level. That you could identify that there's a shift in leadership, and therefore there's a shift in leadership style. And as a result of that shift in leadership style, rather than me sitting back and bemoaning the fact that he don't do it like Pastor done and that he don't preach like Pastor and all that kind of stuff, it is what do I need to shift? And how do I need to grow from this?
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's major, and that speaks volumes. I think based upon my interviewing pastors that have done it, even up until the last minute that we made our decision to do it here, I was on the phone with a pastor that has done it. I said, what has been the struggle for you after you stepping down? And he shared with me that the struggle for me stepping down is allowing them to lead. Because if I sit there, I'm seeing things from my years of experience and said, that ain't gonna work. Where did that come from? And we're laughing on the phone, and I said, okay, I can see that happening, particularly with me, because you know, they're, for all practical purposes, even though there was 2 pastors before I got here, one serious pastor, LW, who planted the church, and then someone that didn't know what pastoring was about, who basically, tore the church up. When I got here, this is virtually a church plant, because we had to begin anew. And I followed, if you will, not indirectly, but LW was a solid hooper. I mean, he did. That ain't in my DNA. I grew up under a solid hooper, Pastor Jesse White. That ain't in my DNA. But I realized that I didn't have to mimic them. I had to find my own voice and et cetera. So I can appreciate you acknowledging that rather than sitting back and saying, he ain't doing it like Pastor, that I need to adjust to this new flow and learn from it and define my voice. Because everybody pours into that cup and you begin to find your own voice. What has been for you, Albert?
I think so my background just professionally and just development-wise, I knew that coming into this, I knew certain challenges I would have just when it comes to change management, transition of leadership. It wasn't my first rodeo in replacing a long-term leader that had been in place. And when I did it the first time, even though it wasn't a church setting, it was a business setting, there were mistakes made, things that I learned by experiential knowledge now that I'm like, okay, I remember when I did this before. That's not the way that you transition an organization in a healthy manner. Because naturally, whenever a new leader comes in, one, you're going to be given a new vision. You're gonna be different because you're not the same person. And one of the things that I have said to the leadership team is, if I were simply going to be the same thing, if I was going to be a carbon copy of you, there'd be no need of me.
No need of me. I might as well stay in place.
And it's the same thing that I said will happen between our transition. If he's just going to be a carbon copy of me, then I might as well stay in place. But what God typically does between Elijah and Elisha is Elisha gets the mantle. And so when we look at Elisha's miracles, he did twice as much as Elijah ever did. So there were some things that he did that Elijah never did. That's the new stuff. But then there were some things that were almost exactly replicated, almost the exact same miracle in the exact same manner because he has the mantle. And one of the things that I knew from God is that I had received your mantle. I understood what I was blessed to grow up with a good father. So I know what fatherhood looks like. And
you mean from a biological perspective?
From a biological standpoint. And so I also, because I know what fatherhood looks like, and this was a conversation you and I had early on before the transition, I said, I know what sonship looks like. And I said, and one of the worst things I could do as a son, as your predecessor, is come in with the mentality, I'm in control now, what I say go. From a spiritual and a legal standpoint, yes, that becomes the case. But from a spiritually mature standpoint, that would be the dumbest decision I could ever make. Because if God gives you a father, that father is there to help guide the actions of the son. And so I knew that there would be times that as a son, just like with my natural biological father, I would be challenged. But I remember that day. I'll never, why I've never let my insurance lapse? Because the one time that I had let my insurance lapse in my early adult life, I was fresh out of college. I was getting ready to get on the road and drive down to Atlanta to spend some time with some of my college friends. And my dad knew I was leaving, and my dad said to me, do you got insurance on that car? He's just being a father, right? I said, well, I mean, my bill came due, I didn't pay it, but I'm gonna get it paid. He said, don't get on the road before you pay your insurance. What did the son do?
Got on the road.
I wasn't even driving. I was newly married. My wife driving my car. Out of nowhere, deer comes. She, and she's all shook up and stuff. I'm really calm in traumatic situations. So I was like, I'm calm in the situation, but I'm also in the back of my mind like,
this is gonna cost me.
Oh man, you don't have no insurance. This is what I'm thinking to myself. And so, I'm pretty smart, but I'm also spiritual. I naturally just go and pay the bill because I had the money to pay it. I pay it, so I have insurance coverage on the day that it happens. But do you know, God never would allow me to make a call because what I knew is that at the moment it happened, I didn't have insurance.
Wow.
And as much as my flesh would try to, at times when I'm going through and I'm like, man, I need to get this car fixed, I could make a simple call and tell them the accident happened. It happened on the highway. So, police reports, all that stuff is after the fact, would have been all after I had coverage. But in my heart, I knew my father had told me not to get on that road. And the worst thing that I wasn't willing to do, even though I was still very spiritually immature, I knew the Lord's voice, and God was like, don't you do it. And I wasn't willing to step out and see what the resulting action would be if I went against God. Because as you know from other testimonies, which we don't have time to share, there had been a key moment when I was in college where I went against the Lord's voice, and it cost me. So at this moment, I wasn't willing to go against God's voice because I knew the cost I paid in college when I did something that I clearly heard God telling me not to do. And
So you, from that context, you understand sonship.
I do. And so when I told you up front, because one of the things you said to all three of us, you said, if this doesn't work, it will be for no other reason than the three of us. If we don't know how to function as a team. And early on in the transition, there were times where you had to be the father. No, I'm just being real though.
Yeah.
You have to be the father and say, I see what you're doing, I see where you're going, but I really feel you should do X, Y, Z. And you never once say, do this, because you said, when you take authority, I'm going to step out. Because you said you knew that was the area that if you didn't do that, that would be the problem for you. But anytime you gave me advice, you always framed it from, this is what I see. And early on,
I think that was even before we had the service.
even before we had the service, yeah. Just simple little things that you noted. And I told you, I said, and even when I really wasn't agreeing with you on one of them, I said, I don't agree. I said, but I trust you enough to follow my father's voice. And so I did what you said do. And it was the right call. And if I had made the other call, I don't believe we would have transitioned as smoothly as we did. So the first shocker was not the challenge. The shocker, the biggest shocker has been the ease. Now, have there been challenges? For sure. And I would say my biggest challenge was me knowing when to turn to actually turn the dial from I'm living out what Anthony Payton did to now I'm doing what God is telling Albert Brownlee to do. Because that was literal stuff from how we do service, how I preach, what's my style. And one of the things I learned early on, and this will be my concluding point, is that anytime, and I've shared this with Jack before, when we've talked about just developing your voice. I said, if I'm feeding your dog and you're out of town and you tell me, now when you get to my house, this is how you do it, this is how my dog like it. If I don't want to get bit by your dog, the best thing for me to do is to follow your instructions. Now, I'm not calling the Saints dogs.
I know you're not, but I get the illustration. I get it.
And so when I transitioned, even in all the times that I preached here, the 2.5 years before we even got to this point, my ministry style was very similar to your ministry style because these were your sheep. And I knew from sitting under you how they were used to eating, how you framed messages. even series preaching, which you know is the running joke, because I was like, I ain't a series preacher. I'm not preaching no series. And what does God do the first month?
First thing, you got a series.
It was a series. I got to week 3 in July of preaching, and I said, the Lord made me laugh at myself. He said, now you do realize that this is a series, and all 3 of these messages been connected. So I just acknowledged to the congregation, because that's my style. Hey, God is talking, you know, we in a series right now, blah, blah, blah. But that's been the joy of it for me. And the challenge, the biggest challenge was, when did I turn? And there was a service in August. I didn't preach at all in August till the last Sunday. And when I preached that Sunday, I would say that was probably one of the first times that I preached fully as myself. And I remember when I was here in the pulpit and I went around and I laid hands on people in the congregation. And that was something I had seen you do before, but it was something I had never done in the whole time I was here. And I remember when I heard God tell me, go out and start laying hands on people and praying for them. And I was literally, now that's God speaking, but the flesh man was like, oh, you know, all eyes on me. They're going to think I'm trying to show, they're going to think, and God said, do what I told you to do. And it took a leap of faith to step down off the platform, because at that point, I realize it today, even right now talking about it, I hadn't realized what happened because I had seen my father do it, but I had never done it. But it was the physical portion of me stepping fully into the role of senior pastor. I'm not just Albert here preaching, keeping church going, keeping Sunday service flowing. I became the pastor that Sunday.
I'm Pastor Albert Brownlee.
And I remember after that service, Minister Tamara Kelly came up to me and she said, don't go back, be yourself fully from this day forward. And I've strived to do that. And there's been some critical points even since then. And even one Sunday, kind of similar to the same message you gave, you know, I told the congregation, I said, I'm done talking about how we got here. I was talking about how we got here because I was a part of the change management. We had to keep talking about it. It's just like therapy. People were grieving the loss of their pastor for 29 years. 15 years. But whatever amount of time, it was longer than they had been, the 2 months they had been with me. And they loved me. And that was the thing that I knew this church loved me. That was evident before I became pastor. This church showed me so much love when I was just the minister of music. I think that was part of what made it, I had never been in a church like this, to be honest.
Really?
Not where I felt that kind of love. No. No, I've said this to Pastor Jack, though. He know this.
Wait. What did he say? I'll never be a member coming to you.
Yeah, that was what I said. You weren't supposed to tell that part.
He can't preach.
He can't preach. Well, I'm going to go to that church. Yeah. But not knowing, but that shows you how the enemy will constantly try to keep you from the very place that God has called you, because I can guarantee you, as active as I've been in every church I've ever belonged to and been in leadership in every church, and since I've been in the ministry, being used to minister from every pulpit of every church that I've been a member. And in every church, I can safely say, and this is no offense to those other places, because I learned something at all those places.
Yes, of course.
But I was tolerated. Yeah. And I remember my best friend would always tell me, after he left the church we grew up in, he said, one day you're going to get to a church that celebrates you. He said, and when you get to a church that celebrates you, you'll never go back to a church that tolerates you. And he didn't feel that till he stepped out and got his own ministry and felt celebrated for the first time in his life. But I felt that before you said I'm going to be the next pastor, I felt that as the praise and worship leader. Yeah. I was celebrated and I was loved for what I brought to the body. And that feeling, that's more than money. Yeah. You can't replace that.
No, you can't replace that.